talking about some causes, okay? So again, being in functional medicine, we really investigate this, and we have to really think back along this person's life where they might have been exposed and kind of look at the timeline. We don't want to just stare at the patient as they walk in the office. You know, what's been going on with them? We have to kind of be like a CSI and really paint a picture of what really happened. We can't always point to blame, by the way. I'm not looking for blame. Remember, I'm looking for clues to help me understand this patient's functionality. So causes is, we're going to have a large established colonies of biofilm, which again are harboring these molds, right? And these molds often produce mycotoxins. Mycotoxin is the fancy buzzword you might hear a lot. So they don't just show up. Mycotoxins have to be produced by the mold, typically toxic mold, okay? And the mycotoxins are what gives us those symptoms we talked about earlier for the most part. Again, like the brain fog, the fatigue, etc., the sinusitis, all that stuff, okay? The flare-ups, okay? Where can we get this from? Where does this kind of start at, right? Well, first of all, if you go check out my video on microbes and understand germ versus terrain, you understand that we really have mold around us all the time, even in a really clean environment, that you keep cleaned up really well. There's no leaky faucets, right? You're still going to get mold spores in there, guys. It's just ubiquitous to the human experience. It's ubiquitous to nature. Mold is everywhere. We'll talk about some of the biggest kind of contributors, but it's everywhere. You're not going to stop mold. We just want to limit the limit the spores in your air and what you have around your body. And then we can then start to lower that load on your body, and we can actually start to heal at some point, okay? So you can have large exposures. Let's say, for example, you lived in some housing when you're younger. Like I grew up really poor in the hood, right? So we lived in some apartments, probably weren't the cleanest, weren't the best. They probably have some, water leakage. So let's say you only lived there for a year or two in this apartment, and you had a leaky faucet or a leak or a wet basement down the corner, and it grew mold, right? That mold is not just going to sit there in that corner. Its job is to proliferate life just like yours is, and it's going to then try to get airborne spores, and it's going to be everywhere, okay? Everywhere. I mean, it can start in one tiny patch in the basement this big and end up in large colonies in the attic, believe it or not. Also, mold can actually combine with other bacteriums in your dust mites. And again, you may keep a really clean house, but guess what? That dust can go underneath like a fridge. Are you moving that fridge every week to vacuum? Probably not. You got dust mites in there, or dust bunnies in there, and that mold is combining with it, making some really nasty toxic byproducts. But anyway, let's say we're exposed to a lot of microbes, mold microbes, and their, off products, right? And then what we're going to do is then get this colony, and then let's say we move away from that. Let's say we even move into housing that is very clean, right? Very well kept, very standard there. We still have that mold colony that we got when we were younger. And I've seen patients with 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, they've been, in better housing for the rest of their life, but that early childhood exposure created a colony that's basically haunted them their whole life, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And obviously with stress, it can get really bad. So that's kind of something to think about. There's other exposures, of course, where it's never really a large exposure of the spores, like a colony of mold, but you have small amounts. So where do we get those from? Believe it or not, leftover food. Again, mold is everywhere. You're going to get spores in all of your food, even if, again, it's prepared properly, cooked properly, you're still going to get some mold in there. You can't really stop it. Again, that's why terrain is more important. But anyway, let's say we drink a lot of conventional coffee that's not mycotoxin free. Every cup of that coffee, guys, is going to have a whole bunch of mold spores coming in your body. Every single cup. Teas also, anything that's kind of dried out, in these big bins outside, especially in the South and South America, they dry all that stuff out in the sun, and then they kind of close it in. Well, there's still going to be a lot of moisture. It's very humid down there, right? You're going to get mold trapped in there, and it's going to grow like crazy. I've even seen, this is crazy, watch this. I do a lot of French press coffee, okay? And I kind of went a little bit, took a shortcut and didn't get mycotoxin-free coffee a few years ago. And I didn't clean out that French press very well. And I left it sit for a couple, 3 days. It wasn't even that long, maybe a week at the most, right? I go to clean it out, and I dump the grounds out, and I go to kind of clean out the little strainer, the plunger part that comes down. And I couldn't get this stuff off there. And I was like, what's going on? And I looked closely, and it is actually a huge colony of biofilm that wrapped around the plunger part of it, okay? It's called a slime mold, and it's on there good. I mean, I would have had to take in a blowtorch, a hammer and chisel. I'm not kidding. I was scrubbing that thing and didn't even budge. Imagine if you were colonized with a slime mold, which is a biofilm type mold, which is actually quite common out there. Okay, it's pretty nasty. I literally did my own science experiment without trying to, without realizing it, right in my own home. And I really woke up like, wow, we've got to get some mycotoxin free or mold free coffee, because this is not okay for that to be in my body. It was pretty gross. And I just could not imagine what a lot of you patients are dealing with that have mold illness out there. So that's kind of some different ways you can get exposure. I mentioned leftover food briefly. Yeah, if we cook our food, we put it in the fridge, and then we let it sit up, 3, 4, 5 days. As a sister, even if you don't see mold colonies, guess what? It is growing on the food, even if you don't see it. If you were to then take that to a lab 3 days after you cooked the food and it didn't appear to have what you could see as mold, you would actually find billions of mold spores starting to release in that food, believe it or not. So you got to be careful with leftovers. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. Some of you may be able to tolerate it, some maybe not. I'm just giving you some education here.